Okay, hit start.
Depends on the setting. Yeah.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to give folks just a minute to come on to the webinar with us. It's exciting to have you join us. So thank you.
Yeah. So Anisa and I today were, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Anisa, for allowing me to tap into the technology that we used a year ago, I guess almost a year ago, when you rolled out leadership in crisis. And we did how many 14 weeks of sessions that were, at the time, I guess we never really thought about it, but but it was all focusing around issues in a pandemic and communication and some stuff. So, looking back a year later and seeing our inboxes flooded with all these different webcasts that people are still trying to do, you were definitely ahead of the game there, and it's nice to resurrect this technology and start a different series together.
Thank you. I tell you, for those of you who are just coming on the call, thank you for joining us. We're talking about the Leading in a Crisis web series. We did over 70 webinars with experts on topics like, as David was mentioning, everything from shifting to a remote workplace, to engaging your employees who are now remote, to mental health in the workplace during a pandemic, and then of course during the 2020 movement towards greater awareness and awokeness. We did a series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of those are actually available in the replays at leadinginacrisis-summit.com. Sheila is our VP of client services. She's on our webinar today. And so Sheila, I know you can hear me. If you'll find that link, and folks that want to check it out and check out those replays for free, please do so. So if you'll share that link. So David, you've created a really good lineup for webinars today. And in our morning session, we're just going to kind of set the tone for diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, best practices. So will you share with us just a little bit about your vision for why you've put together the summit and today's lineup? You want me to share my screen and share the...
Yeah. Yeah, if you could throw up what you have as far as the screen goes. So really, I am David Whitmarsh. I run a few different human capital websites, and over the next year, I'm going to be doing a series of these, focusing on different topics. Starting out here with DEI, and truthfully, it's probably for obvious reasons. It definitely is probably the hottest topic on most organizations' radar right now, and so we figured we'd start that. And I may actually, haven't put a date on it yet, but depending on the response, the feedback, I may actually rerun a similar event in 4 months or so if there's still huge interest. So what we've just done is went out to community, brought together some experts in the space, or in some cases, tools that help you become the expert in the space, and just pulling those sessions together, having a bit of a conversation or presentation around those, and hopefully, there's something in these that resonates. There's something in there that you can learn. There's maybe some material that you want to share with your team, and we're certainly here to help you if you have any questions, or want help actually rolling out a program. So that's sort of why why I put it together, and put it first on the list of 12 that I'm doing this year.
Beautiful.
And we just really want to focus on allowing and collaboration to share best practice which is really what all my networks are all about. So
That is what it's all about. And so in today's talk, we'd love to hear from you guys that are joining us. Sheila has put a couple of questions in the chat box. First along is, where are you with your organization's D&I goals? Are you guys superstars? You're rocking it. You're looking for the next lineup of progressive initiatives. And that means, in my mind, that means that your organization has representation across all diversity, all of the diversity spectrum. Or you perhaps are early on in your initiatives, but are they being well received, or are you meeting with resistance, and how are you handling that? So we would love to hear, how can we direct our conversation today towards what's meaningful for you? You're the one that showed up. I want to make sure it's good for you and your goals with your organization. So just a little bit, thank you, David, for putting this together. I'm going to share just a little bit about myself as well. My name is Anisa Aven, and I am the CEO and founder of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. Founded the company in 2004 with the intention being to bring coaching and affordable employee development solutions, scalable employee development solutions to organizations. And over the course of the last 17 years, I've been privileged to work with many organizations, from small to Fortune 50, for example, bringing forth greater movement in the employee development and culture development and change management for our clients. But as such, one of the most difficult culture change initiatives that we've started to work on are the initiatives around diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's difficult for obvious reasons, as well as not so obvious reasons. At what we're seeing, and we're going to talk more about this in our Lean DEI webinar today, which is at 12 noon. But actually, before I go off on a tangent, let me just introduce you to a few of the other talks that you'll have an opportunity to join today. First is the 11 Central, 12 noon. David, tell us a little bit about the head of Moxie and this Ditch Your Outdated Diversity and Inclusion programs. Anything you want to say about that to share with people what they'll learn in that session?
Well, so I actually haven't seen this session, to be perfectly honest with you, but if you follow Maureen, she does some great interviews around the topic. I reached out to her truthfully over a Women in Leadership event that I'm putting together in Maureen, and we sort of got
about Maureen Bertner Boyd.
That's right.
Head Moxie Exchange. Got it.
Yeah, and so so in following her, after the conversation, she does some really great interviews around diversity topics, and strongly recommend that you connect with her and follow some of the sessions that she does. Really super powerful. So so she's speaking at noon. And I'm just going to pretend Anisa and I have a running joke because she always refers to everything as being Central Time. And I tell her that Texas is not the center of the universe. So, so we have that going, but it's a great session from Quality Work. I'm sure you guys will really enjoy it, and I'm certainly looking forward to catching it live.
Perfect. And then at 12 Central, 1 Eastern, we've got the diversity, equity, inclusion, not something that's going to fix itself, or we're going to talk a lot about change management principles and that iterative learning cycle, from benchmarking to identifying those who are most in need of support and education, and as well as those who are most likely to leave because they're feeling marginalized, all the way through the education process, through continuously listening to your employees. So that's at 12 noon today. I'm going to come back to that one. And then at 2 Central, 3 Eastern, we've got Robert Brown, who's going to talk about where do you even start, which is really kind of an important conversation, even for those of you who have deep experience and long-term programs. There's always a need in this particular goal of creating an inclusive culture and a diverse workforce of respect to constantly come back to that benchmark process. And in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. Anything about Robert and Ulumo that you'd like to share with the folks, David?
No, so Anisa and I will actually be on that call as well, and sort of talking about the framework of establishing early benchmarks and truthfully, how can you measure success to anything if you don't know where you started? So I've worked with Robert on a few other areas other than diversity, and he's got a really solid product and solid methodology. And so I'm looking forward to being a part of that session.
Perfect. Perfect. One of the things that I did want to mention is as you're looking at your initiatives, a couple of things that we're doing for free, complimentary, is we have put together with leandei.com /DEI benchmark, a benchmark. It's just a few questions, probably take you about 10 minutes. It allows you to gauge your organization's efforts with sort of the gold standard, what other most successful organizations are doing in the realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, and how do you compare? At the end of that, we'll send you a report. And if you find it useful, we facilitate just a strategy session to help you review your results as well as identify what do we need to do moving forward to take that one next step that's going to be the most effective solution, right? So that's at leandei.com. I see Sheila has already posted it in our shared chat box. So thank you, Sheila. So I'm going to show you a picture, and then I'm going to share with you a little bit of a story of something that happened here recently. What I'd love for you guys to do is just post in the chat box one word that you think of or a phrase that you think of when you see this image. What does it mean to you? What does it remind you of? What what thoughts do you have? Obviously, we're talking about in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, but don't limit yourself. What do you think of when you see this image? Good, positive, negative, whatever. Thank you, Alicia. She writes, at the core of everything, we are all the same. Rosalind, thank you. She writes, all the skeletons look alike. David, what about you? What do you think of when you see this image?
Well, it's funny, right? Because it really is such a great visual, and yet once you dress it up, there is so many different interpretations, but really when it comes down to it, all the same. I know I've used similar posts or similar things, more so around eggs, right? They come in multiple colors, and when you open them up, they all have a yolk and look similar. So it really is amazing, why we struggle with something when at the root of the problem, we're all identical. Right?
That's right. That's right. That's a fair statement. Sheila says, underneath it all comes down to our foundations, our skeletons being alike. We're all made up of the same stuff under our skin color. Jonathan said, it's inaccurate, right? This is not the whole story. And I want to share with you that this last week, a very dear friend of mine posted this, and the intention of it, this was on a famous social media network, and the intention of it was to communicate, we're all the same. Underneath it all, no matter what our differences, we are the same. oxygen, carbon, water, you got it, right? Hydrogen. And another dear friend of ours wrote in response, easy for you to say as a white man. There was nothing more than this image. And then another friend of ours said, easy for you to say as a white man. And it was a little bit more than that. It was as someone who isn't traditionally marginalized, right? And an ensuing dialogue proceeded. And in that dialogue, I asked the question because I have done a great deal of study and certifications and training in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And our team includes hundreds of experts that have spent 30 years in this space. And so I've learned so much from others. And from my filter, I said the same thing. I said, okay, help me understand what it is that I'm missing, because I see this as someone saying, you know, can't we just see the truth that we are all the same? We should treat one another equally, because there is no difference at our core. And as much research and studying as I've done, where the conversation took me was to a whole new level of awareness. Our friend who commented on it said, you know, the issue is not that we don't see each other the same, because that would be great if that were true. The issue is when we simplify a very complex, and this is my interpretation of the dialogue. It is not exactly the dialogue, but it's through Anisa Aven, you know, filter. When it comes down to it, when we say things like, we're all the same, I don't see color, I don't see why we need to keep talking about this over and over again, when all we have to do is treat each other fairly. Let's just move forward and treat each other with respect. It oversimplifies the deep systemic racism and discrimination issues at the core of not just the American culture, but many cultures. And at the core are biases that we're not addressing when we oversimplify it by saying things like, I don't see color, for example. So thank you. Alicia said, the problem is that people don't see this overall, which is where our problem lies. And that is it. This is the ideal, right? We're at the core, we're all one, we're all the same, we're all made up of the same components. Let's treat each other equally and with respect. That's the ideal. What happens in the course of discussing that in organizations is where we meet that resistance. And on that scale of resistance, you have folks who are saying, you know, against the 1619 Project, for example, and they're saying things like, why are we rewriting history? Well, we're not rewriting history. We are moving from a white history to a all-inclusive history that includes all American history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But so on one extreme, you've got this resistance to the dialogue at all, and it just wants to skip over to, let's just treat each other with respect and move on, right? And that's why some folks get angry when we talk about reparations, or when we talk about adjusting history in the classroom. So much so that they're, well, I won't go down that rabbit hole. Pause. Let me go back to why this matters in the workplace. It matters because no one is wrong in our interpretation of this image, right? I'm not wrong for believing that the intention underneath this image is to say, hey, we're all the same, let's treat each other respectfully. But neither is my friend who said, easy for you to say coming from a white man. And in traditional learning and development, we want to simplify, right? If we're teaching something on performance management, it's pretty simple, right? What's the competency you're judging? What's the measure of success when you're doing it well? What's the measure of failure when you're not doing it well? And what's the gap in between? Let's close the gap. Let's have a conversation around that. Now move on down the road. Diversity, equity, inclusion doesn't work like that. It is a longer culture change process, and every voice matters, and every voice is going to be different in their interpretation of it. Likewise, a person's journey towards understanding what it means to foster an inclusive workplace, that journey is everyone's journey. And it's going to take some folks, they're going to wake up because they've been working on it for years, or they never even had to work on it, right? They're like, this is just who and how I was raised. Other folks may not ever come along, right? That's okay. It's also called the acceptance of cognitive diversity. What's not okay is for an organization to say, we're going to stick our heads in the sand, we're going to let people think whatever they think, and as long as you show up and don't act poorly, we'll be okay. That is what ends up resulting in that avoidance of the conflict, the avoidance of, no, this is our culture and this is our values and this is how these values will be represented in this organization. That ends up fostering that disconnect. And ultimately, we're talking about businesses, so profits matter. It impacts profit, it impacts employee engagement, and all of the above. So thank you for allowing us to kind of chew on that for just a moment. What I figured we could do next is talk a little bit just about the best practices. David, anything about that you want to share?
About the best practice in general, or?
Yeah,
So,
just about the conversation we just had and the complexity that you're seeing with your clients.
yeah. So I think there's two ways to really look at this, right? There's one way is equality. That's becomes a human right of everybody, right? But the underlining fact, and there's tons of research out there, and just thinking about this now, I really should have done a better job at fostering some sessions to support this. But there is research that is rock solid that tells you your company performs better with a diverse workforce. And if we're in it to raise money, or not raise money, but increase sales and profits, then that's a topic that we really need to focus on, right? And that's also could be the key to driving change, if we can show this to CEOs and get buy-in of why these efforts have to be done, not on a shoestring budget, but properly, and get that sort of engagement and belief right through the organization.
That's right.
And show that it does make a difference in sales and for a company, or revenue, and all sorts of good things that go along with that. I'll use an example. Mind you, it's a not necessarily a race or anything, but my niece graduated as an engineer, and she got a job in banking. And the first thing I thought was, what the heck do you want an engineer running in your banking, for business banking? And it just didn't make any sense to me. And then, in conversations with her after, we finally got together, this a couple of years ago, what the bank did is they bring a bunch of business people, new grads, and on the team, they drop people with different education backgrounds onto those teams. And so she's on a team as an engineer, mechanical engineer. She's on a team with a big bank that's focused. The rest of the team, or a good chunk of the team, has their degree in business. And the only reason why they do that is because they want to have a different perspective in looking at problems.
Yep.
And so, that the analogy, remains the same, right? If you have a diverse workforce, you're going to see perspectives on different issues. And when it comes to getting products out on the street or market, it only makes sense to have more opinions in the process than it does having, one, right, or fewer. So
Love it. And you're absolutely right. At 12 Central, 1 Eastern today, when we talk about it's not going to fix itself, we actually bring some of those very specific statistics that you're talking about to support making the case for diversity, equity, inclusion, such as those organizations who are successful at cultivating a diverse and inclusive workforce end up outperforming their peers significantly. And I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it's significant. Yolanda, really, really appreciate your question. She says, why does it have to be related to profit for the organizations and not about because it's the right thing to do? I think that you're probably going to find my answer as generic as anyone could ever answer it. And the bottom line is that because businesses don't do things because they're right. They do things because they're forced to, because the external community says you will either do this or I won't do business with you, right? And that's the obvious: great customer care, or I'm no longer going to do business with you. Stop supporting child labor, or I'm not going to do business with you. Either commit to being a organization that champions and is an ally, is an anti-racist organization, or I'm not going to do business with you. So that's the obvious, right? But internally, we're finding that up until 2020, most organizations did have some type of a diversity, equity, inclusion. Not most organizations, most larger organizations, thank you, had a DEI initiative, goal, statement, right? But what they often did was very checkboxish. Here's an e-learning course. We want everyone to take that. Oh, it's not forced, but we really would like for you to, right? Or once organizations realized, we're going to get sued and have harassment lawsuits or wrongful termination lawsuits if we don't do something, in compliance, right? To say we don't support, we're anti-harassment and we won't tolerate racism in the workplace, right? So they did some compliance training. We're talking 60 minutes of a pre-recorded webinar every 2 years, I think was some of the laws that were out there. So what we've seen now is society saying, hang on, no more lip service, right? In just this last month, we're seeing, or 2 weeks, this last week, we're seeing organizations saying, we're not going to support Georgia with MLB, Major League Ball, if you're going to enact voter restrictions that disproportionately marginalize people of color, right? And so that is an organization standing up. Why? Because we're now getting to this place where the community, society is rising up saying either speak out or we will boycott you too. So the same thing goes for inside an organization. We know it's the right thing to do. And there are organizations that are mission driven that will do the right thing. An REI just does the right thing because it's part of who they are. They will compromise on their margins to do the right thing. They will not reduce the quality of their sustainable products just because it will increase their margins. Ben & Jerry's over the years has shown that they're also like that, where we are committed to social change and to being activists in making the world a better place. So most of the time, as far as I know, they don't compromise those values. But most organizations have what they consider a fiduciary duty to ensure that their shareholders make money. And any initiative that cannot be justified with bottom line impact, let me repeat that, any initiative that costs more than adds impact to the bottom line can be argued is not part of that corporation's responsibility. And if there is a board, that CEO, that COO, that CFO are risking their jobs, truly. They can get fired for not being able to show a positive profitability and an impact from that initiative. So for those of us who are responsible for making the business case, just know your numbers. The numbers are there. Know what it means to a brand's reputation when an organization doesn't take a stand and ensure that their guiding principles are inclusive of people of color, those with disabilities, and those with various gender orientations, for example. So, is that helpful?
It I'll let Yolanda answer that question directed to her, but that's a great summary, Anisa. And truthfully, it's, I don't know why it has to be one or the other, not just both,
Yeah,
right? And if something needs to be done, then you got to build that case, man. You got to get all the data you can, so you hit every objection, right on the nose, and just say, here it is. Well, we don't have the cost. Well, okay, we don't have the cost. Here's the study that say it's good, right? Or those are all things that you just have to be prepared and have to have that information. And if having that information, means that a product or a launch of an effort might start in a month versus a year, then it's worth the time to do.
that's
Right?
right. That's right. There's a really great book that I read. Gosh, I bet it was years and years ago, but it's called The Value of Virtue. And it helped me begin to think in terms of making the case for conscious capitalism, making the case for corporate social responsibility. And I haven't read it in years, but it was sort of a foundation for me to understand when I'm supporting corporations and organizations and moving towards doing what's right just because it's right, understanding that there's always a financial component. But get this, there's always a financial benefit to doing what's right. You just got to have the ability to know where to get that research in order to present it. And that becomes the messaging when you're building your case.
So, Anisa, did you want to touch on that top line survey that we're?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Please share a little bit about that.
Well, so in with my theme kind of being best practices, really what I wanted to do, and we hope to have it done today, truthfully, but we're kind of having some head luck and elbow jabs to make sure it's formatted properly and everybody has their opinion on it. But we want to do a top line survey around DEI initiatives and just not taking too much time out of people's schedules, but asking them questions like what worked, what didn't work, did it meet expectations, and sort of just, our goal is that you can, once the thing's done, if we have proper involvement, you'll be able to come in and maybe just focus in a bit more on the process that people used in order to gain success, right? Because we know it's pretty confusing out in the landscape, and a whole bunch of people do this and that and this and that, and we just want you to get it done, right? And so if we can put together um, sort of some trends that we've seen from success and failures, then hopefully it'll allow people that read the survey to sort of you know skip through some of the
The pitfall.
process of taking a look and just focusing on better areas to to get done and hopefully improve or address your DEI issues.
Thank you. So, in a nutshell, what I heard is that's going to come out shortly. The benefits to participating are you're going to get the report at the end that show this is what other organizations are doing. Here's what's the consensus. Oftentimes, that's also a great way to make a case for your internal initiatives. If you know that most organizations are doing listening sessions, for example, it's real easy to say, hey, this is what the going standard is. We need to at least be at the going standard right now. And so, David, thank you for organizing that. I think people will really benefit from participating and the outcome, learning about the outcome
Yeah.
of it.
So you guys can expect an invite shortly to that.
Perfect. So let's
Anything else?
Yeah, let's
Sorry, go
talk a
ahead.
little bit about just some things I want you guys who are joining us today to really consider. These are the kind of questions that I get all the time. Where do we begin? Which I believe Robert's presentation later today is really going to help talk about that benchmarking process. And of course, our technology in Lean DEI starts with a benchmarking process. Number two is what's easy. Well, I've got a little philosophy on that, and personally, I'm not so sure anything about DEI is easy, but there are some things that you can do that are simple versus complex, that are just standard. How do we approach this? What's low cost? There's a lot that can be done in diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that don't have to cost a lot of money. As long as, I'm going to show you in a moment, you create a safe place for those dialogues and for the initiatives to bear fruit, so to speak. And then what are the pitfalls to avoid? And we won't have time today to get through all of this, or at least in this session right now. We will talk more about some of these pitfalls, et cetera, at our 12 Central webinar. So to begin with, let me see. I want to talk a little bit about options in your DEI initiatives. Really comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative might include one or all of these options. I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that diversity and inclusion are two different things. Diversity, when you've moved the needle on your diversity efforts, you have representation inside your organizations at every level that is comparable to the community that you serve. Right, and to the community at which you are conducting business, as well as the greater national community. Right, so a way to look at that is if your workforce is, well, I guess I don't have to go into detail about that. Let me know if you have questions about that. That's probably pretty obvious, but it's about representation and equal voice at equal levels of the organization that are representative of the percentages across race, gender orientation, and disability, et cetera. So a mentoring program. So I want to go back to the difference between diversity. So that's diversity. So inclusion is ensuring that your workforce has a voice in the way the organization is run, in the progress that the organization makes. Inclusion is about that, just simply that feeling of making sure that your employees feel heard. Inclusion means that all people, regardless of their abilities, disabilities, healthcare needs, have a right to be respected and appreciated as valuable members of their communities. And in this case, as valuable members of the team. When a person feels included, they get to participate in the various activities of running an organization, including the decisions, including having their voice heard, including being able to share their difference of opinion or how they're being treated in a safe place. So those are two different things. You'll have your diversity goals in your recruiting and hiring and representation, but then you're going to have culture development goals that are around inclusion. So I'm going to proceed to the next one, but for those of you who are joining us, what does it mean when you've got the E in DEI? So you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does this equity piece actually mean? And if you'll share your thoughts about that, I'll come back to that in a minute. So first is just developing a mentoring program. No matter how big your organization is, a mentoring program will benefit the bottom line every time, whether it's part of a succession planning strategy or part of your inclusion strategy. It's really important that your BIPOC and other traditionally marginalized groups have access to mentors inside the organization. Now, this doesn't have to be a long-winded program with taking a lot of time from your mentors. At minimum, it could be a single meeting once a quarter with a subject matter expert inside the organization with a few mentees. Optimally, you will have identified about 10% of your workforce, and those folks will have access to a 3 to 6 month program, meeting at least once a month with an identified mentor. That mentor will then, of course, require a little bit of training and coaching in order to buy into how this whole mentor thing works. But it's one of the most elemental things that an organization can do to ensure that sense of inclusion in the organization, and to provide career pathing opportunities to your traditionally marginalized groups inside your organization. 2, establish a diversity recruiting plan. And by that, I mean, I'm going to open up my chat box here, make sure I can see all the chat. There it is. So diversity focused recruiting plan. In order to produce an outcome that looks like fair and equitable representation inside our organization, you're going to have to make the effort to develop and reevaluate your recruiting plan. And that includes training your managers on hiring practices that eliminate biases, even sharing with those managers and those hiring folks that are doing the interviews the roadblocks to appropriate, fair hiring and interview practices. Next, let's talk a little bit about facilitating awareness and buy-in via unconscious bias, anti-racism, and inclusion training. So this is clear. We all need education. I think I mentioned earlier that I've been doing this work for a long time, and just this past week during that conversation around the skeletons, I realized, wow, I saw that as something kind and something saying we're all the same. And my dear friend said, no, that's not how I see this. It really opened my eyes. And so there's never going to be a time until we truly have a different society, and that's probably going to be several generations from now, where and then it'll probably be new biases, right? Where we're not going to need to cultivate greater awareness in our workforce. There's a lot of resistance to unconscious bias training or implicit bias training. Nevertheless, it's one of the foundational pieces for people to really begin to understand where they stand, especially for leaders. I'm amazed at how many leaders say, yes, we're committed to diversity and inclusion, but I don't want to do this unconscious bias training. Our people don't act like that, so we're not going to do it. That to me is part of the challenge that you guys will have at building a case, because you can't really do diversity, equity, inclusion right without addressing microaggressions, the myths around biases, and the myths around our differences. Has to be a part of the plan. You may just have to dress it up a little bit to where it's not overtly, we're going to talk about bias and racism right now. Some leaders are more comfortable with that if you spin it towards strategy and education around why this is a challenge, as opposed to just unconscious bias. It's also really important to create some guiding principles in your organization that are specifically about cultivating an anti-racist, not just a diverse and inclusive workforce that values differences, because that's the towards. You also want to ensure that the guiding principles, the standards of behavior, include specifically and called out anti-racist behaviors and performance expectations. And then, of course, inclusion training. So next, I want to talk a little bit about something that doesn't cost a lot, but is something that is pretty critical to one of your first foundational pieces, and that is fine tuning your discrimination and harassment policies. Um, Things like understanding language that is inclusive versus language that is exclusive. Simple example is the term that many of us use all the time. We need more manpower, right? We need more. I think there's another word for it too, but we need more manpower, right? Well, that is an exclusionary term. So I'm going to ask you guys, what would you use if you weren't using manpower? What would you use instead? What might be something that you could make sure that your employee handbooks and your policies are not? It's not that it's exclusive; it's that it's less inclusive. Another example might be when someone speaks about their wife or their husband. Will your wife be joining us today? Will your husband be joining us today? Will your boy, or are you bringing your boyfriend to the company picnic, right? It's not that that's exclusive, it's just less inclusive because it assumes that folks have a husband or a wife, when in fact, a more inclusive term would be something like, will you be bringing your spouse or your partner? Right. So those are some of the ways in which you want to look at your employee manuals and your policies. Next, we want to move to inspecting and improving your complaint systems. Really important that there is a safe way for folks to vocalize their concerns. Um, Next, you want to foster employee resource groups, so diversified networks and cross-company networking, and just establish some ERGs. But these ERGs, employee resource groups, need to be sponsored by a champion of change inside the organization. It is not enough to have it be self-run. We've seen that those particular groups continue to be segregated from the greater organization, and it defeats the purpose of that cross functionality and cross organizational networking. If you don't already, appoint some diversity and inclusivity managers and train them up on inclusive versus less inclusive language, and train them up on how to spot marginalization and biases, and help them become the champions of your DEI goals. Creating a safe place for conversations about race and diversity. It's uncomfortable. We're not going to get around that. We're going to make mistakes. Oh, we're really going to make mistakes because we haven't walked in others' shoes. We don't know exactly which item that we bring forth just because of how we were raised and who we are and our cluelessness, myself included, is going to be offensive at which time. Our job is to not take it personal and to help others not take it personal, but to be inquisitive. Help me learn. What can I do better? Help me understand why what I said was offensive. Whereas right now in the workforce, we're finding so many people that are automatically defensive as opposed to curious and open to help me understand. So you're really going to want to cultivate that safe place for conversations. Let me make sure. David, I haven't monitored the chat box, so there it is. Okay. All right.
We're all good there. Yep.
Okay, good deal. So it's essential that you work towards cultivating executive sponsorship of the initiatives. And I find that many leadership teams really do believe that they are committed to diversity and inclusion objectives. And they really do understand that diverse organizations outperform those who are less diverse. So they understand the business case in many cases, and they really do believe that they're saying, hey, here's some money, just go do it. If you really want to make a difference, we also need to support that top-down buy-in, which means if you want to drive a value-based organization whose behaviors match that plaque on the wall with the values that include D&I, you're going to have to find some executive sponsors who can also show up at the meetings, show up at the training, and paint a vision for where they are aiming for the organization to go. They may not have to attend all of the training, but you want to ensure that their voice is commanding the vision if you want folks to really buy into and support the long-term initiative and goals. Finally, it's about continuous improvement. When I mentioned earlier that we're going to not get this right, we're going to constantly be getting this wrong, I kind of meant it. We're never really going to get this right for potentially many generations. And so that continuous improvement means pulse surveys, it means focus groups, it means active listening to your employees and making sure that those employees can include those that are marginalized or on the edge, who don't have a lot of access. You want to walk the shop floor and say, hey, do you have a moment? I'd love to pick your brain about the culture here and your experience, right? You may have to do that 4 or 5 times before someone really feels safe enough to share their thoughts if you're doing it one-to-one. But there are some technology out there that you can use and some well-formulated questions. And I think you'll learn about that in several other sessions today about this continuous improvement. You're going to benchmark, you're going to enact some education and changes in policies and create some mentor programs. Then you're going to listen again. How'd we do? Are we hitting the mark? What else do we need to do? And you're going to do that as a continuous cycle. So that's in a nutshell what we're hoping to bring to you with our programs today and over the next few months as David continues to bring cutting edge progressive webinars your way. So any questions that I can answer for you? I'm going to go back very quickly while you're thinking of questions to ask. And a couple of things. One, what's your takeaway from our time together today? What was meaningful? What was helpful? Any aha that you can share always helps other folks in the call go, yeah, that was one of my ahas. That's a takeaway too. It can be one word. It can be a phrase. What is your takeaway that was supportive of your goals? And while you're thinking of that, I want to read, Sheila said, equity means everyone across the board. Yolanda says equity means increased workforce. And both of those are in accurate and representative equity. Equity also means in its simplest form, it means fairness across all benefits in an organization. So it means pay equity, gender, there should be no gender disparity in pay equity. It also means that those people of color, those who are traditionally marginalized in any way, have the same benefits: vacation, healthcare, time off, mental health, access to mental health, mentoring, coaching, career pathing, and absolutely compensation equity. That's what equity means. And David will have to do an entirely another session just on creating equity. It's probably the most difficult for organizations to do because it means coughing up fair compensation across all your disparities. And that's it's a prospect because it does impact the bottom line directly. But there's a case for it.
Well, I really liked how you framed those what I guess 8 different topics, and really it's something that we should probably be mindful for as we listen to the sessions today. Try to compartmentalize some of those things and where and how it might relate into some of those talking points. But that's awesome.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you. A couple of the takeaways. Yolanda struck a chord with me asking about why it has to be related to profit for an organization, not about the right thing. Yeah, I just want to say, right. Also, I like your mention of inclusive, not exclusive language. That's one of the takeaways. Another takeaway, I got to thinking about which companies lead with this and really lead with their values above profit and how I can support them. So very helpful. So I want to make sure that you guys have our contact information. I'm going to put that on the screen. And again, let's see, share screen. There it is. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. Oops, that's the wrong one. Hang on. So David, tell folks how they can get a hold of you while I'm messing around with our, there it goes.
Well, any email that you would have gotten from, you can reply to it and I'll get it. You can also, look me up on at David Whitmarsh and LinkedIn. You can also go to my site at wcg-bp.com and there's my contact information there. Thank you, Anisa.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for putting this together. Your webinar series and what you bring to the business community is so incredibly helpful in so many ways. So I feel honored to have an opportunity to be a part of it, for sure. And for Turnkey and Lean DEI, you can get a hold of me at turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. Our phone number 281-469-4244. And don't forget to take that DEI benchmark and let me know if I can support you in your strategy. As I mentioned before, no obligation. It's part of one way that I really like to give back. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing of your success. See you later today.
I'll see you later today.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.